And I knew enough to know at that time that if at 41 years old and being a mother of 6, if I wanted to find a way to beat it, it was going to have to be something new because there was no curative treatment.
What if I told you there's a deadly cancer that most people have never even heard of? A cancer so aggressive, so silent, that by the time it's found, it's often too late. This is cholangiocarcinoma, also known as bile duct cancer. It's rare, it's aggressive, and it's often misdiagnosed or completely overlooked. Because how can you fight something you don't even know exists?
I know that when patients are diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, the first thing they do is Google it because they've never heard of it. And it is terrifying to read about it.
Had you ever heard of cholangiocarcinoma before?
Never. I totally remember saying, cholangio what?
And what advice would you give to someone who has just been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma?
To be your best advocate. I usually see it's either the patient or the caregiver, right, who takes a stance in doing all the research and finding all the resources. It's usually one or the other. But I think you have to be your best advocate and know what is available. I think as patients, all we want to know from our provider is that you're going to do everything within your power to keep us here for as long as possible.
What are some of the biggest gaps you see in how cholangiocarcinoma and rare cancers in general are?
The lack of access to second opinions from experts, the lack of access to biomarker testing, to clinical trials, to resources.
But today you're going to meet with someone who defied those odds. Melinda Bachini was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma in 2009. And if you search for survival rates, you will quickly realize why her story is extraordinary. Her story isn't just about survival, it's about resilience, advocacy, and the power of never giving up.
When most people get a cancer diagnosis, it definitely changes their outlook on life and on time. Time is short. I always tell people, eat dessert first. Who cares?
Yes. What if I told you there's a deadly cancer that most people have never even heard of? A cancer so aggressive, so silent, that by the time it's found, it's often too late. It doesn't come with a flashing red warning sign, no clear symptoms in the early stages, no awareness campaigns flooding your social media feed. And yet, for the thousands diagnosed every year, it changes everything in an instant. This is cholangiocarcinoma, also known as bile duct cancer. It's rare, it's aggressive, and it's often misdiagnosed or completely overlooked. Because how can you fight something you don't even know exists? Most doctors won't see a case in their entire careers. Many patients spend months, even years, searching for answers, only to be told it's too late. The lack of awareness, the lack of expertise, and the lack of treatment options create a perfect storm, one where the odds are rarely in the patient's favor. But today you're going to meet with someone who defied those odds. Melinda Bachini was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma in 2009. And if you search for survival rates, you will quickly realize why her story is extraordinary. But what makes her journey even more remarkable isn't just that she survived. It's how she turned her battle into a mission to help others, a mission to make sure no patient has to walk this road alone, a mission to demand more from medicine, from research, from all of us. Today, Melinda is here to share her journey, what it took to fight a disease that few understand, the reality of navigating a broken system, and the hope that she's working tirelessly to bring to others facing this diagnosis. Her story isn't just about survival, it's about resilience, advocacy, and the power of never giving up. Melinda, welcome to Drug Diaries, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Kash. It's good to be here. I'm so happy that you invited me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So, Melinda, take us back to the beginning, before your diagnosis. When did you first notice that something wasn't quite right?
Yes. Oh, that seems like so long ago. I was working as a paramedic and I started having some right shoulder pain, but I carried a pack and a monitor on my shoulder. And I just thought that, that pain from carrying those packs and monitors was the cause of my right shoulder pain. And then I started experiencing a lot of fatigue. But again, I worked 24-hour shifts and I'm a mother of 6. And so I just thought, it's normal to be tired and I'm getting older. And so I kind of, brushed that off as well. And then I started experiencing some upper epigastric issues, heartburn, irritable bowel syndrome, different things like that. And again, things that were brushed off to, okay, you have heartburn, take some antacid, those kinds of things, watch your diet. And as a paramedic, we didn't always eat at great hours of the day or healthy food when you're grabbing it. And so all those signs were just easily brushed off as to getting older and part of the job. But it wasn't until one time when my husband and I were at a critical care nursing course, and we were eating out both morning and night because we were away from home. And I really had some upper epigastric pain. And a lot of the doctors and nurses there were like, it sounds like you have gallstones. And I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. My mom had them. So I quit eating eggs in the morning and no more greasy food at night. And the pain kind of subsided a little. But the thing about it was I had a doctor's appointment when I got home with my primary care provider for something totally different, but I mentioned it to him. And thankfully, he said, we should get an ultrasound to make sure to rule out there's no gallstones. And so he sent me for an ultrasound, and they found a 13 by 9 centimeter mass on my liver that I had no idea was there.
And how long it took you to get to this point from the point you started feeling the symptoms?
Yeah, I would say it was at least 6 months, if not a year, that I started experiencing the right shoulder pain, thinking I might have pulled a muscle, and not knowing, at the time that the liver, can refer pain to different areas of your body or thinking about it. I had no reason to think about it. And the fatigue, probably about 6 months. But the upper epigastric issues were definitely around 6 months or so too. So it took a while before it really triggered that, hey, there's something going on here that isn't related to my job.
Right. Cholangiocarcinoma is often called a silent killer because symptoms can be vague or misdiagnosed. How long did it take for you to get the right diagnosis, and what was the experience like?
Right. So I'm from Billings, Montana, a rural state. There's definitely no experts in cholangiocarcinoma here. Yeah. But we did have a pretty good medical system here in Billings. And once my primary care doctor sent me for that ultrasound, things actually moved really fast. He then had a CT set up and an MRI set up, and, he made it move really fast, which I'm so grateful for. I had a consult with a gastroenterologist, and they were convinced that it was a benign hemangioma and that I had nothing to worry about. But in the meantime, I started doing research, and I knew as a paramedic, having a mass in your liver was never good. So I knew what possibilities could be down the road. After the MRI and the CT scan, they did a couple tests to prove that it was or was not a hemangioma. And I think it was called a tagged red blood cell study that proved it wasn't a benign hemangioma. So then they decided to send me for a biopsy. And that biopsy happened the Wednesday before Thanksgiving here, which was very difficult because I knew it was going to be a long weekend before I would get any results. And it was the Tuesday after Thanksgiving that my phone rang, and it was my gastroenterologist on the other line. And, she said, "I'm so sorry. It wasn't on my radar, but you have cancer." And I was like, wasn't on my radar either. And they just didn't know for sure what the primary was. So I was initially diagnosed with cancer of unknown primary. And I remember being scanned from head to toe, having a colonoscopy, endoscopy, mammogram, trying to rule out if there was a primary somewhere else. And so I was told it was probably most likely intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, but the pathology didn't confirm it until 3 weeks later, when I was able to have a liver resection. They removed 2/3 of my liver. I was told I had clean margins, and then that pathology was sent off, and that was when they confirmed it was indeed cholangiocarcinoma.
Right. And when they told you about cholangiocarcinoma, what was going through your mind? Had you ever heard of cholangiocarcinoma before?
Never. I totally remember saying, "Cholangio what?" I had never heard that word before. So I definitely started doing some research. doing what I tell people not to do and Googling and looking at, the statistics and everything. And I knew enough to know at that time that if at 41 years old and being a mother of 6, if I wanted to find a way to beat it, it was going to have to be something new, because there was no curative treatment. It was palliative care only, and there still isn't. But yeah, and we had no options. We had gemcitabine and cisplatin, and that was it.
Right. And did you receive adequate amount of information easily about the condition, or did you have to, are there any resources that you remember going through?
No, there was nothing. I was giving nothing, no information on it. I never wanted to know a prognosis, because I just always felt strongly that nobody knows what tomorrow brings, whether we have cancer or not. So I never asked that question. But after doing some research, I knew that I was in for a battle, and, an uphill fight. And I knew that I, had to work on my own to figure things out.
Yes.
No resources. I was able to find the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation back then. And it took a while, but there was a discussion board that they had started with on the website, where patients and caregivers from all over the world were connecting and sharing resources. And that's where I got most of my information.
Right. And once you had the diagnosis, what options were presented to you? Were there moments where you felt lost or unsure about what to do next?
Yes. So like I said in the beginning, it was a 13 by 9 centimeter mass in my liver. So it was still confined to my liver. And we did talk to Mayo Clinic for a second opinion on surgery. That was my first big decision, was finding a surgeon. But for personal reasons, I chose to stay home in Billings, Montana, and have that surgery done. It was Christmas time. It was winter. And I really was confident in the surgeons here. And so I chose to stay here and have the surgery done here, 2/3 of my liver removed, and hospitalized for about 8 days or so. But was told that I had clean margins, and, that surgery was the only opportunity for a cure. So I really felt good after surgery, thinking, okay, maybe this is it. And unfortunately, I think that's something that a lot of patients feel. Not many patients are able to get to surgery, only about 20%. And then for those that do, I think they feel like, okay, I'm done. But in reality, the recurrence rate is quite high. And so for me, 3 months later at my first post-op checkup, the cancer had come back, and it was in my lungs. And I'm sure it had already spread. We just didn't see it on the scans early enough, and which I'm very grateful for, because I know if they would have saw it, surgery probably would have been taken off the table. And I still believe to this day that that surgery bought me enough time to find the clinical trial that got me here today.
Right. So you mentioned about participating in a clinical trial, something that not every patient gets access to. How did you come across that opportunity, and what made you decide to go for it?
Right. So, again, I knew that if I wanted to find a way to beat this or be here longer for my family, it had to be something new. So when the cancer returned 3 months later, I asked the oncologist here to please be aggressive and to look for a clinical trial, in which he did. He found one, but at that time, 15 years ago, my insurance wouldn't cover the standard of care costs that went into participating in a clinical trial, which I didn't even know was a possibility. That it just totally blew me away that, there was a clinical trial available, but because my insurance wasn't covered, I didn't have the opportunity to participate in it. And that was my first taste of advocacy, is going with other cancer patients here in the state of Montana and telling our story to the Capitol, and actually getting a law passed that said that insurance companies in Montana had to cover those standard of care costs. But in the meantime, I wasn't able to participate in it because I didn't want to leave my family in financial distress, for a stage 4 terminal cancer diagnosis. So I went ahead and just started the standard of care gemcitabine cisplatin, palliative only, which I wasn't excited about, but at the same time, I'm like, let's give this a shot. We have no other options. So we got started on it as soon as possible.
Right. And cancer treatments can take a huge toll physically as well as emotionally. What got you through the hardest days?
Yeah. I was not good with chemo for sure. I was one of those patients who, I swear, experienced every toxicity there is, listed under it. And I ended up being able to do chemo for about 6 months before the toxicity built up pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they took one of the drugs away, cisplatin away, and the cancer spread from my lungs back to my liver with the gemcitabine alone. And then I remember at that time, they didn't really have anything to offer, so they just tried Taxotere to see what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the toxicity was quite bad. So for about 18 months, I just remember every time it was time for chemo, just getting so anxious and so nauseous. And quite
Right.
honestly, to this day,
Yeah.
when I drive by the cancer center, I still get nauseous. That anticipatory nausea and anxiety still hits me.
Yeah.
But I just, looked at my kids. Our youngest was 7, our oldest was 20, and had just gone through boot camp. And I really wanted to, give it as best of a shot as I could and try to be here as
Mm-hmm.
long as possible for them.
Was there a particular moment in your journey where you thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore? And if so, what pulled you back up?
There was many, many moments. I think I took many chemo holidays just because I needed to regroup emotionally and mentally and gear up enough courage to do it again. But I did get to that point where I stopped treatment, and it was the hardest decision I ever had to make. But I wanted whatever time I had left to be quality. And at the time I was so sick, I was in bed, and it just wasn't good quality time. So I didn't want my kids to think I was giving up or that they weren't worth me suffering through the side effects. But I did get to that point where I stopped all treatment. Again, hardest decision ever. But I was so fortunate that about 3 weeks after making that decision, I literally stumbled upon a clinical trial out at the National Cancer Institute. And because it was at the National Cancer Institute, which is a federally funded facility, and it was covering all the cost of the medical cost to it, my insurance didn't matter then. And they actually covered my cost to fly out there from Montana to Bethesda, Maryland. Everything fell into place. And because it wasn't a chemo trial of different chemos that I've already done in different combinations, I looked at my husband and I'm like, I think we should try this, has the initial chemo for a week, but then it's your immune system. And I said, what have we got to lose? So he and I did all the work. We did take it to our doctor, and, he said, I'll support you in whatever you want to do, but we really did have to do the work. We had to make the phone calls, set up the appointments, share our medical records, send the blood samples, all that good stuff. But we ended up getting a consultation out there with Dr. Rosenberg's team at the National Cancer Institute and accepted into the trial.
Right. And we know cholangiocarcinoma isn't well known, even among many doctors. Did you face any challenges in getting the right information or care because of that?
Yes, I think so. I know that the doctors here had only treated a few patients, and I did ask if there were any, survivors. And I remember my doctor saying, well, one of my patients lived for about 2 years, and that still wasn't good enough for me. But not a lot of information. I think in the rural and community settings, across the world, most of these oncologists are seeing all different types of cancers, and seeing a cholangiocarcinoma patient is rare. They may get one a year or one in every 5 years. So having the information is hard for them, as well as for the patients. I just don't feel like they had the information to give to me. It may not be because they didn't want to. I just don't think they had it there.
They had any resources to hand.
Yeah.
And were there any misconceptions or misinformation about cholangiocarcinoma that you ran into along the way?
I always felt like there was no hope. I mean, I felt hope personally, but I felt like the information I was giving or getting and receiving or hearing, that there really wasn't options or hope. And finding that clinical trial and then having that option taken away in the beginning, And then going back with this other clinical trial and knowing that my community usually works with like Denver or Seattle or Salt Lake City because it's closer, right? And
Yes.
like being able to open the minds of the physicians in this area to know that to look further out, right? And to give the patients the option if they want to be able to travel. So I just felt like there was not information withheld, but I just felt like not all the information was being told. And again, by
Right.
no fault of their own, I just don't think it's there to share.
Right. And at what point did you decide that you weren't just going to fight for yourself, but also for others, as in turning survival into advocacy?
So after I went through the clinical trial, I was the ninth person to enter into this clinical trial, but the first one with cholangiocarcinoma and the first person to have a response. When I entered into that trial, I had tumors all over both my lungs and all over my liver. And I couldn't walk 5 steps without having a coughing fit.
Oh,
My kids couldn't even hug me without me going into a coughing fit. And when I went in for the first, it was an adoptive cell therapy using TIL, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. And when I went in for the first treatment, it's a 3 to 4 week in-hospital treatment. The first week you get the immunodepleting chemo to wipe out your immune system. The second week you get your cells, which they previously removed, surgically removed tumors and then pull those T cells out and grow them in the lab. So the second week you get your cells back with a drug called IL-2, which can have some nasty side effects. And then the third and fourth week, it's recovering your immune system enough to be able to go home. But by the end of that third and fourth week, my cough started going away. And I was like very optimistic, you know, and the doctors were very cautiously optimistic, but I felt like something was definitely happening. And so I had shrinkage for about 6 months, stability for 6 months, and then that cancer started growing again. And in that 18-month time frame, they had studied my T cells enough to be able to know that there was a T cell that was reactive to one of my mutations. So they wanted to treat me again. So I went through that all over again 18 months later with an even bigger response. But because I had such a great response and because I knew how fortunate I was to have a response and to be able to survive longer, I knew I wanted to find a way to pay it forward. So I started volunteering with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. I came on as a discussion moderator on that discussion board and just helped, you know, patients navigate their diagnosis and find resources wherever we could. And then a few years later, I came on as full-time staff, and it has grown tremendously over the last, it's the CCF's 20th anniversary next year.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I think I was employee number 5 when I started, and now I think we're up to 35 employees, which is still small, but huge for us because, you know, it's grown a lot. So I just felt personally that I had to do something with this. You know, I had to be able to help others because I knew how hard it was for me in the beginning, how overwhelming it is to get this diagnosis. And if I was fortunate enough to be able to survive, I should do something with it. And that's what really got me started.
Right. And you work closely with advocacy groups and research organizations. What are some of the biggest gaps you see in how cholangiocarcinoma and rare cancers in general are handled?
Well, I think the gaps are just the lack of access for patients, especially those diagnosed in the community setting. Again, the lack of access to second opinions from experts, the lack of access to biomarker testing, to clinical trials, to resources, and to any kind of tools or support just to understand how to navigate their disease. That's the biggest issue is just access and making sure everyone has access to the same resources and has the same opportunity to live as long as possible.
Right. Melinda, if you could change one thing about how rare cancers are diagnosed and treated, what would it be?
Oh, one thing, I think there's more than one thing for sure. I think the most important thing is for the oncologist to help find a way to diagnose earlier, but then also to provide hope and those tools and those resources to the patients. I don't want our physicians to give any false hope. That's never my intention. This is a very serious diagnosis by all means. But I think as patients, all we want to know from our provider is that you're going to do everything within your power to keep us here for as long as possible. And
Yes.
that you're going to partner with us, to advocate for the best results. We know that, doctors are, can't always work miracles, but we
Hmm.
just need to know that they're going to do everything within their power. And I think that kind of sets the stage for patients to know that, yes, this is a serious diagnosis. And I am probably going to have to do a lot of advocating for myself, but at least I have a physician who is a partner and who's going to listen to me. And we're going to partner on our care plan and our opportunities and our treatments and moving forward. So just partner with the patients, and we have to continue to work on finding earlier diagnosis and better treatments always.
And looking back at your journey, what do you wish you had known when you were first diagnosed?
Oh, wow. Um, I wished I would have known more about the clinical trial world, right?
Hmm.
To this day, I don't even know what that first clinical trial was. And I wished I did. I wished I would have known, which one it was. But I didn't
Right.
have enough resources to really understand the clinical trial world. And I think most patients don't, I don't think they understand the different phases or first line clinical trials versus second line. And I remember having to fail standard of care, which is a horrible term, but before I could enter into the trial out at the NCI, which I did. I progressed on several rounds of chemo. And when I stopped that last chemo, 3 weeks later, when they scanned me, my tumors didn't progress. And so they told me I didn't qualify. And I was like, what do you mean? It's just, there's a whole world of understanding, and you almost have a whole new education on a topic that you never wanted to have. But yeah,
Right.
figuring all that out, but knowing more about the clinical trial world would have been very helpful. I think I would have been able to advocate more. I've learned a lot since then. And if I could
Right.
go back and know what I know now, I'd probably go back 30 years ago and go to medical school.
Right. And what advice would you give to someone who has just been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma?
To be your best advocate. I usually see it's either the patient or the caregiver, right, who takes a stance in doing all the research and finding all the
Hmm.
resources. It's usually one or the other. But I think you have to be your best advocate and know what is available, and then have that partnership with your physician. But most of all, just to not lose hope. I know that when patients are diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, the first thing they do is Google it because they've never heard of it.
Hmm.
And it
Yes.
is terrifying to read about it. And I just want them to know that there are more and more longer term survivors every day. There's
Hmm.
more and more treatment options being provided every day. And you don't get to see long term survivor faces when you Google it most of the time. And
Yes.
so I just, yeah, want them to not lose hope, and to know that there are possibilities out there.
Right. A cancer diagnosis doesn't just affect the patients, it affects their whole family. How did your diagnosis impact your loved ones, and what advice would you give to caregivers?
Yeah, it was hard. Like I said, my youngest was 7, the oldest was 20 and just going off to boot camp. I had one graduating from high school that year and 2 in junior high, 1 in high school. They were scared. They were very, very
Hmm.
scared. Um, my husband was scared, and he's a nurse practitioner, and he had, some medical knowledge, and it was helpful, but he was the one who had a hard time reading about it. And I was
Hmm.
the one who wanted to know everything, and I was
Right.
digging into all the research and finding out as much as I could. And so just finding that balance, and then just remembering that life goes on despite a cancer diagnosis. And, we worked really hard to keep things as normal as possible for our kids, but it affected them and it changed their lives. There isn't one child that didn't write a paper somewhere along their education pathway on cholangiocarcinoma or clinical trials or something along that line. They learned so much.
Right.
And we had taken them to like some camps for kids who had parents with cancer, and they really thrived doing those camps.
Hmm.
They got a lot of help out of it the first couple years, and then the next couple years they were mentoring other kids and helping them, and so I think that was really important. We've all grown and we've all changed, but it definitely affects the whole family. But more than anything, caregivers need to take care of themselves, because if they
That's
don't
true.
take care of
That's
themselves,
true.
they can't take care of their loved one. And it's important that they make sure to take time for themselves, find the resources they need to be able to thrive and to continue to live.
Yeah. Melinda, what keeps you hopeful about the future, both for yourself and for others fighting this disease?
There is a lot that keeps me hopeful right now. There is so much more research being done than ever before. With all the biomarkers that are coming out with cholangiocarcinoma, we have a high volume of targetable mutations for a GI cancer. And so there is a lot of clinical trials being done. We've had several FDA approvals in the last 5 years. I love this community. The hepatobiliary community is a tight-knit community. They're very collaborative. They work well together. And that's truly amazing. The Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation has an annual conference every year in Salt Lake City, which is coming up April 9th. And at that conference, it brings together the physicians, the researchers, the patients, the caregivers, the industry partners, the regulatory people. Everyone comes together at the conference and is sitting at the same table. And when I sit in that conference and in that room and look around at 500, 600 people, knowing that these physicians and researchers are working, towards a better future for patients like me, it really gives me hope to know that there are people out there devoted to trying to find better treatments and hopefully a cure for cholangiocarcinoma.
Right, right. And there's one question I totally forgot to ask you about is, what are the signs and symptoms that one should keep an eye on?
Right. We had talked about that sometimes there's just those silent symptoms or those symptoms that mimic things that can be nothing. And so I think people should trust their own instincts. They know when there's something not going on and push if they're not getting the answers they need. But some of the signs and symptoms you should look for are any signs of jaundice, of that bile duct being blocked, any signs of jaundice, yellowing of the skin, dark urine, pale stools, weight loss can be a sign, fatigue is a big sign. And then there's a lot of possible risk factors. I will say that a lot of patients I speak to tend to not have risk factors, but any kind of inflammation to the GI tract or to the biliary tract could be a precursor to cholangiocarcinoma, like primary sclerosing cholangitis. I would say maybe up to 20% could end up with cholangiocarcinoma. They tend to be screened pretty often, but I know that's terrifying for PSC patients to be thinking about that all the time. Crohn's disease, colitis, anything that would cause inflammation, I would be on high alert for screening for this cancer.
Right. And before we conclude our today's episode, if you could leave our listeners with one message, what would it be?
Again, I worked as a paramedic for 20 years before I was diagnosed with cancer. And I used to see patients, die in car accidents without any warning. And I always felt that when I was diagnosed with cancer, that I was given time that those people weren't. They didn't have the time to say goodbye or make amends. And again, nobody knows what tomorrow brings with or without cancer. So for me, it's all about, living every day to the fullest and doing the best you can with the time you have. Because I do think that when most people get a cancer diagnosis, it definitely changes their outlook on life and on time. And time is short. I always tell people, eat dessert first. Who cares?
Yes.
Life is short and we have to live. So, that's just the message. Again, people are so focused on a timeline with this cancer, especially. And so, I just try to tell them to keep living every single day because we really don't know what tomorrow brings. And it's just important we know that the future, the next best treatment is out there and it's coming. And so if we can just continue to live and thrive on whatever treatment we can, the next best one will be there. And hopefully we can grab onto that and be the beneficiary of having a new treatment along the way.
Wow, that's such a wonderful piece of advice. And you're so full of hope, positivity, and optimism. And It's just so refreshing to see and incredibly inspiring.
Well, thank you. I feel so fortunate and so blessed to be here. And I'm, again, so grateful for the research that's going on. And if it wasn't for research, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for a clinical trial, I wouldn't be here. And I just want to make sure that patients with this disease have the same opportunities.
And as we come to the end of this conversation, I just want to take a moment to thank Melinda for sharing her journey with us. Her story is a powerful reminder of the challenges that come with a rare cancer like cholangiocarcinoma, from delayed diagnosis to limited treatment options, but also for the incredible strength, resilience, and advocacy that can emerge from those challenges. Melinda, your openness and determination to raise awareness, support other patients, and push for better research and treatment options are truly, truly inspiring. Your journey is not just about survival, it's about making a difference for those who come after you. And to our listeners, I hope this conversation has shed light on the realities of cholangiocarcinoma and the importance of early diagnosis, research, and patient advocacy. If there's one takeaway from today's discussion, it's that rare diseases need more attention, and every voice, including yours, can help make a difference. Melinda, thank you once again for your time, your insights, and for being such a strong advocate for the cholangiocarcinoma community. It's been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so very much.
And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. If you found this conversation valuable, please share it with others, because awareness is the first step towards change. Thank you.